what your resources are to call 1,000 companies and so on. I would put any kind of closing remark that I'll be calling you next Thursday, and in fact, it can do that. I would generally not put any question of choice of words, but I think that some of the letters I've seen are almost a threat that I'm going to call you if you don't read this. Okay, I don't think that buys you anything other than it gives the person the opportunity to tell the secretary, when this guy calls, tell him I'm not in. Okay. So I think you can make some mention that you'd be available for an interview during the month of December. Delighted to hear from them. Plan to give you a call at your convenience, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there's no risk. It costs you a phone call, which could become very expensive if you're mounting a nationwide, you know, campaign. If you're looking for a position just in Detroit, well, you know, maybe you can use your resources differently.
One of the things that you may not know about, because I don't think we've had it when you were here, we have a Wi-Fi now.
Well, no, we didn't have that when I was here.
You have that available to them so that, you know, to make follow-up phone calls.
That's great. That's a great resource.
Yeah.
Any other? Yeah, just.
These days, does the fax come into play with the printing process?
Well, I
Does
know-
that get your attention quicker if it's fax?
Well, that's an interesting point, because I notice now things, there will be, like in this, I held up this article that's from this National Business Employment Weekly, which is job ads basically from the Wall Street Journal. And some ads will say, you know, it has the address and their fax number, and I presume people fax things over. I notice occasionally, this primarily is from recruiters or headhunters, will receive a fax copy of the person's resume. There, in my view, I don't know if they give you any special aid if you fax them the resume. For one thing, you've lost any, the quality of the format is sometimes poor on that, just in terms of translation law. So, but the fax machine has arrived. I mean, we use it for everything. Maybe this will evolve into more of a network. I wouldn't say you want to do very special emphasis for that.
You mentioned going to these corporate directories and getting addresses. Is it worth a while to find out if a specific person we can send a letter to, or director of personnel is good
You
enough?
mean as a title?
Yeah.
You mean rather than Mr. John Doe is just the director of personnel? I would never. And again, in my view, I think you waste your stamp and whatever it costs the paper is to send it, you know, director of personnel and movement may concern. I would absolutely never, and it's going to be work. I mean, you have to go get the name of who the current John Doe or whoever it is, director of personnel, or in situations where you can identify, if you know you want to be in the ad department of a major consumer products company, so you look at P&G and find out who the director of the ad department is. Or something. You can send it to the functional person. There's some people that argue that's the best strategy. I think in a lot of instances, it's then routed right back to the director of personnel. But to answer your question, I think every instance, if I were doing it, I'd send it to a specific person, and I try to make sure that person's still there. I mean, these days in corporate America, I mean, just because they're in a directory, which is probably at least a year old, that person, half of the people in there may not be in a current position. So to the extent you could use the Watts line and get exact names, I think that increases the likelihood, one of the earlier questions, that your resume will be looked at. Yeah, Ross.
I'd say about, in doing that, about 30% I gather, I've changed the information on, and I've gone through, got all the things from the Blue Book, the corporate, I think both you mentioned,
Right.
probably doesn't want. I'll call on all that information before I send out a letter, and I'd say about 30% of the changes. Sometimes company changes, they can be bought out so quickly and don't know. And the other thing to do, if you're really going for an area, is get the Chamber of Commerce directory. Also ask for page lists. I got things from Raleigh that were 1986, things from Memphis that were 1987, and they're not working the page lists on that.
You can certainly distinguish, you mentioned mass mailings a lot, you can certainly distinguish letters that have been researched or one that is of mass mailing material.
I think that's right. I think with the days of the word processor, I think one can produce, when I say mass mail, I'm not thinking about a letter that just a text that somehow is, the name is typed onto a pre-printed letter or something like that. I'm thinking about a letter produced off a word processor where it looks like a custom drafted letter. And I think if you're going to do a mass mailing, you need to spend a lot of time drafting out a cover letter that doesn't look like to whom it may concern sort of thing. It's just some kind of boilerplate. I think you can't type 1,000 letters. Okay, if that's part of your strategy, you're going to cover a large number of companies. Then you're going to have to. There's a trade-off. You're going to have to draft a letter that looks as personalized as possible. And everyone knows that these things. We're sending out things to. We're using the word processor just like everyone else for business operations. So I think there's awareness that they're not each one's a personal letter, but still, I'd spend some time to make sure the cover letter looks as personalized as possible, and then you need to mass mail it, mass merge it so it looks customized.
So the more customized, the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Following up on what you were saying about the calling to get the current name individually by name, would you recommend talking to the individual before you set the resume?
I would. I don't think you'll, depending on what the level is, but I don't think you'll get through, even if you.
Sometimes you do. You're not trying, you do, and you get the nice conversations, and you can just call, ask for the information. Sometimes you get through to the vice chairman at the time.
I've heard strategies of call during the noon hour because the secretary is out and the person's going to pick up their own phone. It could be true, but I don't. It's a gray area, but I would personally I wouldn't recommend that. I would send them a package, and then you can call during lunch and hope the person answers the phone, and then you can say, by the way, did you receive the package I sent you? Just calling, blah blah blah.
Just call first and get the name.
I would just call and get the name, and to do that, you can, if it's any major corporation, you just dial the general number. You don't even have to be transferred to the department. Probably the receptionist is going to be able to call up the name on the machine, or if you say, I want to speak, could you tell me who the chief financial officer is? They're going to be able to do that right then. And I would ask them, spell a name for me, what's the middle initial, what's the exact title, thank you very much. So, any other, yeah.
The direction of your first job seems to be quite a bit different from where you are now. How focused was your job search for the first job, and how focused do you think you did?
Well, I don't think I did many of the things I just talked about. I don't think I did them right. So, having said that, it was a different environment. I suspect in this environment, if I took the approach I did 14 years ago, I probably wouldn't have as good a success. But the market was good. I think I had some credentials. I think I could present myself reasonably well. I probably could have done a lot better job at it if I had some coaching on it. But in terms of my my current position is somewhat different than when I left Tulane. I was recruited from here to go to Union Carbide back in the days when Union Carbide was a bit of a different company than they are now. But I was looking for something specifically in finance. I had a select group of companies that I was interested in, and I was aggressive in the interviews. I knew what I wanted, and I think if I had any strength, it was that I could present myself in the interviews. I didn't have any good mass marketing campaign, but I wasn't looking. I had a more focused, to answer your question, I had a more focused group of companies I was interested in. And I eventually decided, since I was in finance, that part of my career strategy was, well, if I go to New York, at the time the review was 3 or 4 years, I'm still there. But to succeed in New York in finance, then I could make the move back to the South as it goes. But, any other?
Related to interviewing, there's a lot of, you'll read about questions to watch out for and try to prepare yourself as well for any kind of question that can come up. And there's a lot of what I feel are pretty somewhat silly questions. What's your favorite vegetable and that sort of thing.
Where do you want to be in 10 years from now?
I wanted to ask you, what do you feel, I'm sure you've interviewed pretty large number of people, has been the toughest question that you've asked students where they've had the most, in interviewing, what's your toughest question?
And I think you're right. A lot of people, particularly professional recruiters, develop a set of, part of their repertoire, what I would call trick questions or pressure sort of questions. What do you know about our company? Are you familiar with the reorganization that was announced last week, so on and so on?
See, I find those to be valid questions.
But what is your favorite vegetable?
Yeah, or which vegetable would you want to eat?
You know, I would. Okay. I would go into the interview with the attitude to be prepared for anything. I mean, even if the person is heard of this stress interview where the person has orchestrated some kind of pressure tactic to see how the person reacts. I would be prepared for anything. My own view, if the company were represented by such an idiot that wants to know what kind of vegetable I want to be, I would have to, you know, I would ask myself what I want to be within the company. The job market was very tight, maybe I wouldn't want to be within the company. I'd think about what kind of vegetable I want to be. Yeah.
On that same line, one of the questions I had one time was, and I didn't know how to answer this, but I just answered it the best way I could. What is your greatest weakness?
Now, that's a class death, and that's one I would be prepared for. And there may be, I wouldn't view that as I think that's a clever question in a way. And the answer, I tried to develop an answer to give them something. You can't say, well, you have to, I would tend to have we talked about being prepared with a storyline for your interview. That's one of the things I'd be prepared for. And try to look a little reflective and then come up with what your prepared answer is. That's cynical. I mean, that's the way I would approach it. And to the extent you can, if you have a glaring weakness, that I wouldn't offer any. I wouldn't say, well, you know, I'm a procrastinator and I didn't do too well in school. I would offer some kind of weakness. In my case, I would say, well, probably my biggest problem, I guess some people would view as a weakness, is I'm a workaholic. And, well, that's a weakness in some people's view, but for a corporation, you say, hey, you know, we got a new workaholic, it'll fit right in, no problem. So I would have an answer for that question. There's some others. Another classic one is, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Okay, I have an answer to that. And take a look at some of these interviewing books, because they talk about some of the approaches and some of the standard questions that recruiters tend to follow. And I'm not a professional recruiter, so I don't know that whole line of questioning. But generally, I think the better companies and the more astute companies are going to be represented by people that have more of a conversational sort of interview. And they're not going to have a series of 49 questions and the answers. They have to submit a form back to the head of director of personnel. Some companies may do that, but at Pepsi, I would think you'd find people that are so professional they can size you up by having a conversation with you. They might not ask you what's your greatest weakness. They might feed you to some more casual ways to reveal what some of your shortcomings are. Yeah.
In terms of getting information, the company selling you, when you interview people, you try to sell them on PepsiCo, wherever you work for, and when I go in the interview, should I try to get the company to try to sell me?
I would tend to take that as a strategic approach to the interview. I think a lot of it I would view as sort of a supply and demand situation. You know, if you're have 10 years experience in investment banking and you're here just to get one last credential and you're interviewing with Morgan Stanley and you can talk about the transactions you did with the last mergers and acquisitions 2 years ago before you came here and so on, and they are really happy. You know, who has the leverage? Who has the balance of power in the thing? I would think generally at this stage you're going to be self-serving more so than vice versa.
As the first job now, without much experience, do you see it as very important to work for a large firm as opposed to a small one?
It may depend on what your overall career plan is. You don't have you're saying going into it in a situation where you really don't have the work experience per se. If you could land a position with a corporation that had a training program. For instance, when I started with Union Carbide, and I had the internship, that was really all I could talk about, which was in finance and banking. But I didn't have a 5 years that I've been out in the job market after an undergraduate. I went directly from being an undergraduate to the program here at Tulane.